Bill Clinton sits calm, unshaken. Gavin Newsom leans forward, hand raised, fire in his eyes. What started as a discussion became a clash. What happened in that moment no one expected, and America couldn't look away. The cameras were already rolling. The studio, America Now, a nation in question, had been designed for spectacle. Deep navy walls, dramatic lighting, sleek glass table, 2 chairs, 2 microphones, no podiums, no buffers, just proximity and pressure. The producers hadn't planned for a confrontation. They'd envisioned a thoughtful dialogue. The seasoned statesman Bill Clinton in a rare appearance, and the bold California Governor Gavin Newsom, poster child of progressive momentum. It was meant to be a conversation about generational transition, about where America was, and where it was going. But the moment the red light blinked on, it became something else entirely. Clinton arrived first. He moved slower than he used to, but every step still carried weight. He wore a simple suit, no tie, sleeves slightly rolled. Not polished, deliberate. He sat, eyes scanning the crew, and nodded once. Calm, focused. Then came Newsom, stylish, striking, all sharp angles and fast energy. He didn't sit right away. He circled the table once, like a lion surveying the room. When he finally took his seat across from Clinton, his smile was polite, but his eyes were ready for a fight. The moderator barely got through the introduction. Tonight we ask, can old power still guide new progress? Or is it time for a new voice to take the lead? A beat. Then Gavin struck. President Clinton, he began, you've spoken for years about consensus. But consensus built on compromise with broken systems isn't progress. It's nostalgia dressed up as wisdom. The audience shifted in their seats. Clinton didn't blink. And what do you call progress that forgets its history? Newsom leaned forward, his voice tight. I call it necessary. This generation is cleaning up messes made by the last one. Climate inequality, systemic injustice. We didn't build this house, sir. We just live in the fire. Clinton turned slightly, one hand resting on the glass. So you burn it down? That was the moment. It spread before the show ended. News outlets, political Twitter, even meme pages shared it endlessly. The caption changed depending on the side. Small blue diamond, old man shuts down the room. Small blue diamond, Newsom speaks truth to power. Small blue diamond, America, caught between 2 fires. Back in the studio, the conversation continued, but the lines were drawn. Newsom came hard. Stats, outrage, urgency. He invoked Gen Z protests, climate deadlines, police reform failures. We don't have the luxury of patience, he snapped. While you preach balance, people are bleeding. Clinton didn't raise his voice once. You think urgency and wisdom are enemies, he said quietly. They're not. But unanchored urgency? That's panic with a PR team. Even the moderator looked stunned. Newsom shook his head. You're romanticizing a system built to protect itself. You had your time. We're trying to survive ours. Clinton leaned back slightly. Then maybe you should spend less time attacking the past and more time proving you can do better. By the end of the hour, it wasn't clear who had won. But it was clear what had happened. 2 Americas had spoken. One rooted in memory, one clawing toward the future, and somewhere between them, the nation held its breath. The debate ended, but the tension didn't. As Clinton and Newsom stepped away from the stage, there was no handshake. Just a brief look, one part acknowledgement, one part unresolved challenge. The crew stayed silent. Even the moderator seemed unsure whether to thank them or just let them walk. Outside the studio, the storm had already begun. Clips were being cut and shared before Clinton reached his car. Some were edited to show Newsom's righteous fury, others to highlight Clinton's calm deflections. Cable news anchors scrambled to frame the night, Was it a generational torch passing or a philosophical collision? Depending on the outlet, it was either a takedown or a masterclass in patience. But online, it was chaos. Thousands of posts exploded across platforms. Clinton was praised by some as the last adult in the room, a figure who still carried moral authority. Others mocked his restraint as outdated, irrelevant. One tweet read, "Clinton talked like it was 1998. Newsom is living in 2030. Meanwhile, Newsom supporters were euphoric. He was trending under hashtags like #NotYourSystem and #BurnItBetter. To a generation raised in crisis, his tone felt real, urgent, honest. But even among his allies, there were murmurs of doubt. Some wondered if he had pushed too hard, if interrupting a former president was strength or recklessness. Gavin felt it all. Back in his hotel room, he sat alone, scrolling through the reactions. Every video snippet, every tweet, every headline. He had gone in ready to confront legacy. But now, he was wondering whether legacy had confronted him back. He replayed Clinton's words in his head. Unanchored urgency is panic with a PR team. He hated how much it stuck with him, because deep down, part of him feared it might be true. Across town, Clinton wasn't watching the coverage. He was reading letters, notes, transcripts of a speech he'd be giving next week at a university in Georgia. When an aide entered the room, asking if he wanted to respond to the online blowback, he simply said, "No need. They'll forget the noise. What matters is who shows up next time with something real to say." But he was thinking. That much was clear, because something had shifted. This wasn't about left or right. It wasn't even about youth versus experience. It was about two definitions of leadership. One that believed in pace and process. Another that believed survival didn't have time for either. And the country, whether it realized it or not, had just been asked to choose. By morning, newsrooms were booking panelists. Colleges were dissecting transcripts. And somewhere in the middle of it all, a new divide was taking shape. Not between Democrats and Republicans, but between those who wanted to rebuild and those ready to tear it down and start again. This was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. By sunrise, the clash had left the screen and entered the streets. In Los Angeles, a crowd gathered outside the state capitol, young, loud, holding signs that read, "The future can't wait," and Clinton had his chance. They chanted Newsom's lines like scripture, especially one phrase that had already become a slogan. "We don't have the luxury of patience." A counter-protest formed 2 blocks away. Smaller, older, quieter, but no less resolved. A retired teacher from Pasadena held a handwritten sign, "Wisdom isn't the enemy." They didn't scream. They stood, silent, holding up signs. Some wore Clinton campaign pins from 1992. A few had tears in their eyes, not from rage, but recognition. The same political fire that had once moved them was now being used to burn down the house they helped build. Cable news couldn't get enough. Clinton versus Newsom, the battle for the Democratic soul, read one headline. Another, progress versus preservation, can both be right. Editorials poured in. One columnist wrote, "Newsom may be the voice of urgency, but Clinton speaks like a man who's already lived through the storm." Maybe both are right. Maybe that's why we're all so uncomfortable. In Washington, D.C., aides from multiple senators circulated internal memos urging their bosses to align cautiously. No one wanted to appear too old or too naive. Several presidential hopefuls issued vague statements about respecting all perspectives while quietly polling to see which side was gaining ground. But the public didn't wait for cues. Town halls overflowed. Local forums turned into battlegrounds of ideology. Parents argued with children. Teachers revised lesson plans to include the debate. At a university in Ohio, A philosophy professor replaced his syllabus reading with a simple directive. Watch the Clinton-Newsom exchange. Write about truth. Meanwhile, Clinton stayed mostly silent. He appeared once, briefly, in an interview with a longtime friend on PBS. The host asked if he'd seen the reaction. Clinton nodded. "I've been in rooms with world leaders," he said. "I've seen revolutions start with less heat than that table had. But if people are listening now, even in anger, that means the democracy's still breathing." The host pressed him. "Do you think Newsom crossed a line?" Clinton smiled softly. "I think sometimes you don't know you crossed it until you look back. And sometimes you find out the line needed moving." Across the country, Gavin Newsom wasn't smiling. He was in New York, preparing for a university Q&A. His team had advised him to soften the tone, to avoid more confrontation. But he was restless. That night, as the auditorium lights dimmed, he looked into the crowd, mostly students, some faculty, a few scattered reporters, and set his notes aside. "I didn't come here to be careful," he began. "I came here because we're out of time to keep asking permission." Applause. "But I've been thinking about what President Clinton said, about anchored urgency, about panic, and I want to tell you, he wasn't wrong." The crowd quieted. "I'm angry, and I think we should be. But anger without purpose is just noise. And maybe last night, I made some noise." He paused, took a breath. "Let me be clear. I stand by what I said. But maybe I should have listened harder to what he didn't say. Because that silence, it spoke too." Silence again. But this time it was different. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was listening. And in that moment, something shifted. Not an apology, not surrender, but recognition. Across the nation, that small moment rippled. Clips of Newsom's speech were shared alongside the original debate. Headlines began to change tone. "Newsom steps back to reflect," a political rarity. A viral tweet read, "He didn't fold. He just made space." That's leadership too. And for the first time in days, Clinton's allies posted something more than praise. They posted hope. Because perhaps what the country needed wasn't a winner. Maybe it needed proof that fire and wisdom could sit at the same table, and neither had to burn the other down. Still, the divide was real. Talk radio exploded with callers. Some called Clinton a relic. Others said Newsom was reckless. One caller, a retired union worker in Michigan, said, "Clinton had the scars. Newsom had the fire. We need both. But damn it, we can't afford to keep choosing sides while the whole place is cracking." And maybe that was the point. Maybe the real breach wasn't between two men. Maybe it was in all of us, split between what we know and what we hope. And maybe, just maybe, this moment could start stitching something back together. A week had passed, but the noise hadn't faded. If anything, it had deepened, less viral, more structural. What began as a political moment was now becoming a cultural mirror. Schools, churches, editorial boards, and dinner tables had taken sides, or tried not to. Not because they wanted to fight, but because the question at the center of it all refused to leave. Can urgency and experience coexist, or are they destined to collide? In the heart of D.C., inside a quiet townhouse turned strategy office, a group of Clinton's longtime aides gathered around a TV screen. They were watching Newsom's university speech for the fourth time. No one spoke until it ended. One of them, a former press secretary from the 90s, leaned back in his chair. "He's learning," he said. "Too fast." Another nodded. "He didn't apologize. But he's pivoting. That's more dangerous than defiance." Clinton, seated in the corner, scribbled on a yellow legal pad. He hadn't said much all meeting. But when he looked up, his tone was clear and final. "I want to talk to him again," he said. The room went quiet. "Sir," one aide said carefully, "you already made your point. Why re-engage? The media's finally moving on. Clinton shook his head. That's exactly why. People are starting to turn this into theater. If we don't shape the next act, someone else will. And I don't like the ending they're writing. They debated for hours, but Clinton had already made up his mind. The message would be public. Simple. Unambiguous. Governor Newsom, let's finish the conversation. On stage, unmoderated. This time, we don't argue. We ask each other one question. And we listen. He signed it. Posted it. The internet cracked open again. Some said it was desperation. Others called it brilliance. But everyone agreed it was unexpected. Newsom saw the post mid-flight, somewhere between Chicago and Denver. His staff panicked. Phones lit up. Press started calling. They wanted to strategize, message test, prepare. Newsom told them to stop. I'll give him my answer, he said. Alone. That night, he stood in front of a window, high above downtown Denver, staring at the skyline. His first instinct was pride. He wanted another shot. But beneath that came something heavier. Clinton hadn't invited him to fight. He'd invited him to listen. And that was the harder thing to do. He thought about the photo again. The one of Clinton sitting still while he leaned in, all fury and fire. He didn't regret what he said, but he was beginning to regret what he hadn't asked. What was it like to carry a country's failures on your back? What did compromise really cost? And was patience always surrender, or sometimes survival? By morning, his answer was ready. I accept. One stage. One question each. Let's see if America still knows how to listen. The announcement hit like a thunderclap. Network execs scrambled to secure rights. University auditoriums bid to host. Talk shows speculated endlessly about what they'd ask each other. But the most surprising reaction came from the public. Not outrage, not cynicism, but relief. Finally, two powerful men weren't shouting. They were choosing to sit down again. Not to win, but to understand. Polls showed something strange. For the first time in a decade, Americans across party lines overwhelmingly supported the idea of a civil debate with no moderator. No interruption. Just two people trying to figure something out. The format was simple. Each man would ask one question. Each would get 10 minutes to answer. No rebuttals. No audience. Just cameras. It would stream live. No edits. Clinton arrived first, again. Navy blazer, crisp shirt, no tie. He shook the hands of the minimalist crew, then sat. Same calm as always, but with something new behind the eyes. Not fire. Not calculation. Curiosity. Newsom entered with less bravado this time. Still stylish, still sharp, but quieter. More centered. He looked at Clinton, gave a small nod. No cameras had started yet, but something in that nod said, I've heard you. Now hear me. A producer's voice echoed. We're live in 3, 2. And just like that, America leaned in again. This time, not for spectacle, but for something it had almost forgotten how to witness. Two men, one country, and a conversation that might actually matter. The broadcast began without music. No dramatic introduction. No headlines. Just silence and two men. Bill Clinton sat with his hands folded in front of him, eyes calm but alert. Gavin Newsom sat across from him, spine straight, shoulders relaxed, but inside, his thoughts raced. A graphic in the corner read, Clinton, Newsom, one question each. The camera panned in slowly. Clinton spoke first. Not to the camera. To Newsom. You said something during our last meeting that stayed with me. He began. You said your generation is cleaning up messes made by mine. I won't argue that. But I do want to ask you something. He paused. It wasn't for effect, it was for weight. In a world that's on fire, how do you lead without becoming the flame? Newsom blinked once. He hadn't expected that question. Not framed like that. He leaned back. You don't, he said softly. Not always. Sometimes the fire is the only thing people notice. Sometimes that's the only way they'll look. He took a breath. But the longer I do this, the more I realize the fire doesn't move people. It just scares them, or burns them. And if you're not careful, it burns you too. He looked up at Clinton. Leading now means rage is the easy part. The hard part? Giving people something to walk toward when the fire goes out. There was a pause. Clinton nodded once. Then he smiled, but it wasn't smug. It was tired, like someone who had been waiting a long time to hear that answer. Now it was Newsom's turn. He leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the edge of the table. I've read your speeches, he said, from Little Rock to the White House, and I've heard the word hope more times than I can count. He looked at Clinton fully. My question is, what happens when people stop believing hope is enough? Clinton didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly, a reminder of age, of time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, deliberate. You're right, he said. Hope isn't always enough. Not when the rent's late, or the water's poisoned, or the rights you thought were permanent suddenly vanish. He leaned forward now, his voice gaining strength. But the worst mistake I ever saw a leader make was believing that because hope wasn't enough, it wasn't anything. He looked Newsom in the eyes. Hope is the last line of defense before despair. You take that away from people, and all they've got left is anger. And anger without direction? That's how democracies die. Silence. The room held it like a prayer. There were no applause signs, no audience reactions. Just two men sitting across from each other, holding truths that had been earned differently, but carried weight all the same. Then Clinton broke it. You know, he said, I spent years thinking the job was to be the smartest guy in the room. Newsom smirked slightly. You did okay. Clinton chuckled. But I was wrong. The job was to make sure the people in the room still believed their voice mattered, even when they were scared. Especially when they were scared. Newsom nodded. I think that's where we failed, he said. All of us. My generation screams because we're afraid no one's listening. Yours got quiet because it hurt too much to keep shouting. A beat. Clinton looked at him. So what do we do now? Newsom answered without thinking. We build a bridge. Quietly, slowly, together, while everyone else is still shouting. And with that, the camera faded out. No dramatic music, no bold text, just a black screen and a single sentence in white font. Sometimes the conversation is the revolution. In the days that followed, something strange happened. Cable news didn't erupt. Social media didn't melt down. There were no winners declared, no headlines screaming about a knockout. Instead, people started sharing the questions. Clips of Clinton asking, how do you lead without becoming the flame? Clips of Newsom saying, hope isn't enough, but it's something. Clips of silence. Comment sections filled not with rage, but reflection. One teacher in Michigan wrote, I showed it to my 10th graders. They didn't argue. They just thought, that's a first. A pastor in Georgia showed it during a sermon. A corporate retreat used it to train young managers. A retired veteran in Iowa said, for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel talked down to. And something else happened too. Newsom's approval ratings didn't spike. Clinton didn't trend. No one won the moment. But something shifted in the way people spoke about politics. Less combat, more clarity. In a diner in Tennessee, an older man turned to a younger waitress after they both watched the exchange on TV. He pointed at the screen and said, that's how we used to talk. Before we got so mad we stopped listening. She replied, maybe it's how we'll talk again. Weeks later, when asked if they'd do it again, both men gave the same answer. Only if we both promised to ask better questions. No books were sold. No campaigns launched. But the moment lived on, not as a soundbite, but as a seed. Because in a country exhausted by noise, two voices had chosen something else: stillness, substance, and the radical idea that power could make room. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe and press the like button.